Hi everyone. Very happy to be live with Catherine Fearns. Do you want to start us off with an intro to you and your books?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Catherine Fearns. I am a writer from Liverpool, and I'm the author of the Reprobation series, which is a crime fiction series set in Liverpool. It started off with Reprobation, which came out in 2018. There's a copy of Reprobation here. Oh, that's the old cover. This is the new cover. And two other volumes followed, and we're now up to book 4, which is Lamb of God, which came out in the summer. The series is published by Unorthodox Press, which is an indie press for northern writers. It's a police procedural series which has occult elements. I'm not sure if I would go as far as to say supernatural, but they are stories that can be read on 2 levels. You can read them as straight police procedurals, or you can wonder, as the detectives do, if there might be another world beyond our own. So how you interpret the books really depends on what you believe, and I really wanted to ask my readers questions about what they believe. So yeah, that's the books, and the main theme is Liverpool. Liverpool is very much the main character in the book, but I also weave a lot of religion and science and heavy metal into the books as well. So that's the Reprobation series.
All topics that we will get onto today. Because I've read all 4 of the series so far.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw you just finished Lamb of God, so thank you very much for reading.
I know it's going on my special signed book file because it's signed as well. From when you were
Oh yes, because we finally got to meet in Leeds this year. That was great.
We did, it was great. So they're set in Liverpool, which is where you're from.
Mm-mm.
But you don't live there. You haven't lived there for a while, I don't think. So how was it like kind of right?
No, at the moment I live in Switzerland. We moved there 7 years ago for my husband's work. Before that, I was in the UK, but in various places. But Liverpool is a city that people who grew up there always feel a very strong connection to. I visit as often as I can. I was just there last week, actually, for a book event. And it's a place that I miss very much. And writing the books has been a wonderful way for me to stay connected to the city. And it felt very natural. When I first started writing my first book, which was Reprobation, I didn't set out to write a book about Liverpool. I didn't even set out to write a crime thriller at the beginning. It was the concept that came first. But it just worked out that way. It felt very natural to me to write about Liverpool, and the whole series is my sort of love letter to Liverpool, really. And I want to explore all different aspects of the city, but the books are very much focused on Crosby and Blundell Sands, which is the part of Liverpool where I grew up on the beach. And I've had some really nice comments from people who live there, so hopefully I'm getting it right.
It must be good when you get comments from people who still live there and know.
Yeah, it was difficult to get started because when you publish your first novel, you get very, very excited about it, and you think, wow, I'm an author now. And then you get very deflated very quickly, and there's a low very soon after publication date, when you realize that actually not many people read any book, and certainly not a book that has come out from a first time author with a very small publisher. So it was very difficult to get people to know about the book. At the beginning, it was very difficult to get it into bookshops, even in Liverpool. And there's one fantastic bookshop in Crosby called Right Blend that has been very supportive since the beginning. But yeah, it was quite difficult to get myself out there. but now it's in local bookshops, and I've got some people who come back and read each one when it comes out, and so yeah, that's lovely.
People like me who are there going, yay, there's another one.
Yes, thank you. But you're a bit of a rock fan, aren't you? So that's another draw with the series for you, because I also, as well as Liverpool readers, I have heavy metal readers as well. That's one of the things that I explore a lot in the book. So that puts a lot of people off, but I know it didn't put you off.
Yeah, I'm not as like metal as the people in the book, I wouldn't say, but I have dipped my toes into the kind of.
Yeah, you've been to quite a lot of rock concerts, haven't
I
you? So
have, yeah. Yeah. Left onto my own devices, I'm probably more a punk kind of girl, but
okay, punk is cool. It's all on all on the same spectrum.
it's all on the same spectrum, and my husband veers more towards metal, so
Okay.
we do both. um, I was going to mention that because that's quite a strong theme, and that's a strong theme for you as well, isn't it? Something you really enjoy and kind of play.
Yes, definitely. Again, when I started writing Reprobation, I didn't set out to write a heavy metal thriller, but it came naturally because I started off as a writer doing music journalism, and specifically writing about extreme metal. I've been doing that for a couple of years before writing Reprobation. So writing about music was what I knew, and so that was sort of my entry into creative writing. Um, I also think that a lot of the themes that heavy metal explores, there's a lot of crossover with, especially with horror, but also with crime fiction. Varying ideas about darkness, heaven and hell, religion, good and evil. So there's a lot of crossover there. And yet it's also what I do when I'm not writing. I'm a musician and I play in a couple of heavy metal bands. So it's nice to write about what I know. That's one aspect where I didn't have to go off and do a lot of research because I already knew it.
You get the vibe really well as well, because like the band, like they present one image, don't they? But then, like when you read them and you get to know the band in the book, they're a very different kind of people. You know, they're really nice, kind, genuine, like lovely people, and that's what I think. From the times I've mixed with people who are really into metal and stuff, is what most of them are like.
Yes, absolutely. It's definitely true that the metal community is a kind and gentle community, and supportive. And people may look scary, but they're actually not. And Miko Christensen, who is the guitarist, who's one of the main characters in the series, he's I think he's most people's favorite character, and he was really enjoyable to write because yeah, he presents this sort of satanic image to the world, but he's actually the opposite in real life. So yeah, that was another theme that I wanted to explore, definitely.
Someone on here has said hello to us and said that so many writers are musicians. There is quite a crossover and a love of music amongst writers.
Yeah, definitely. For me, it's all part of the same creative process, and I don't tend to put the writing and the music aspects of my work into completely different boxes. When I'm writing a book, I tend to be composing something at the same time. When I'm in a creative phase, it's both, and the one sort of informs the other. So yeah, it's all part of the same creative process, and I don't even know if I found my final. I was going to say my final form, but that's all right. My final medium. I think it's somewhere in between writing and music, but I haven't figured out exactly what that's. Maybe it's going to be a musical, a crime thriller musical. I don't know, but yeah, it's all part of the same creative process for me.
I think it would work really well. Can you imagine the TV series of these books? Because you would have like the band kind of playing through them. Like there would
Definitely,
definitely be a
yeah.
really musical vibe that would be really
Yeah.
good.
Well, I think all authors imagine their books as movies or Netflix series. I think we'd be lying if we said that we didn't. And I could definitely yeah, I think the soundtrack to Reprobation would be a very fun soundtrack for me. So yeah, I could definitely picture that. Although the thing about metal is that it does put many more people off than it attracts, because it is an acquired taste, especially the extreme elements. I think one thing that helps people who are not metal to get into the books is that they sort of follow Helen's journey. So Sister Helen Hope is a nun who is one of the main characters, and she ends up being a kind of detective, really. And um, she begins by thinking that metal is satanic, and she's convinced that these musicians are the murderers. So she goes on a journey, and she discovers this music. So the reader sort of discovers it with her. So that's a way in if it's something that you think you might hate.
Helen's a really interesting character as well, isn't she? Because she kind of goes through quite a journey about like her identity and where she wants to be in life, kind of through the books.
Yeah.
Try not to give away
Um,
spoilers.
uh, no, I think we can talk about her without
Mm.
giving too many spoilers away. So the protagonist of the books is Detective Inspector Darren Swift, who is a cynical young Scouse detective who hates religion for various reasons. So he goes on a sort of spiritual journey towards the occult throughout the books. But there are two other main characters who are also protagonists, really, and one of them is Miko, the guitarist, and then Helen, the nun. um, and she was the character that I wrote first, really. And she unlike some of the other characters who sort of gain faith through the book, she sort of loses her faith and then gains another sort of faith. So she definitely goes on a psychological and spiritual journey. And I used a bit of a conceit with her in that she is a Calvinist nun, and Calvinist Calvinism doesn't tend. There are a couple of Calvinist orders in America, but it's not really a religion that has monks and nuns. So that was a bit of a conceit, because the book explores a lot of the themes in Calvinism, and she explores them through being a nun. And I think everybody likes to read about nuns and watch nuns in horror. Everyone's fascinated by nuns, and so writing the story from her perspective and exploring what she really believed and the things that she'd given up and the things that she questions. Yeah, she's a really interesting character to write. And as well as being a nun, also she's a lecturer at Liverpool University in eschatology, which is a branch of theology, and it's the study of death and the afterlife. And so that was a great way to get some of the sort of philosophical themes into the book, and that's how she gets involved with Darren, because she's an expert witness. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting aspects to Helen, and her journey is far from over. Yeah, I can't tell you. Well, we can't talk about here where she is right now at the end of Lamb of God, because it would give too much away. But yeah, she is still on her journey. Um, at that point, I can probably tell you that because some people in the reviews of Lamb of God, they said it was the last in the series. I didn't mean to give that impression, because it's not. There's probably going to be 2 more books in the series, because each one is a standalone. It can be read as a standalone, but there is a narrative arc that's going right through, and I know where it's going. Um, and if readers haven't guessed by the end of Lamb of God where it's going, it might become clear in the next book. But I predict that the series will end with book 6. So it's not going to be like one of these Netflix series that goes on for, season 17 and then it just fizzles out. It has a beginning and an end, and I know where it's going.
So we're going to get 2 more books after this one, is
Yes,
what you're telling us, which is
that's what I'm planning. I'm hoping my publisher is okay with that. That's what I'm planning. So I'm just starting to write notes for book 5 right now, and I plan to write that next year.
nice. Do you have, like, because there is like such a strong theme of religion and the occult, like through the book, is that something that you've always had an interest in, or like something you had to do a lot of research for in the
I think it is something that has always been in my mind that I wanted to explore. I've always, I grew up surrounded by religion because I went to a Church of England school where we, like many schools in England, we prayed every day, we sang hymns every day, we went to church once a week. So that was very much ingrained. It didn't have any impact on me being religious because I'm not at all. And none of us felt that it was being. It's odd because we did sing these hymns and we prayed and we said the Lord's Prayer every day, but very few of us were actually religious. It was just part of the school culture, but it was there and we knew about it. My grandfather was a church warden, so I spent my childhood weekends and holidays playing in the graveyard and bashing on the organ and running up and down the church aisles. My husband is Greek Orthodox, so I am officially Greek Orthodox. I love churches. I love church music. I think that I've always tried to be religious, but never been able to believe. And so I think I always had these questions somewhere in my subconscious, and these are things that I guess I'm exploring through my books. At the same time, the books are for everybody in that there's nothing. I mean, it even appears, reprobation appears on Christian fiction lists. So whatever your religion is, hopefully you won't be offended by it because I treat religion with a lot of respect. Even when some of my characters don't. I'm asking big questions, and I ask big questions of the reader as well, I think. And what they get out of the books is determined by what they believe.
Yeah, I was going to say that it doesn't lean towards any one particular religion, does it? It just asks questions, like you said, and sort of treats it as everyone's kind of going on their own journey and like figuring out what they believe about what's happening.
Yeah,
as well.
I mean, it does approach the world from quite a Christian perspective because that's my background. It wouldn't feel appropriate for me to write in great detail about religions that I don't know that much about. So this is a religion where I feel that I can sort of play around because it's what I grew up with. I can ask these questions, but it's certainly not a Christian book, and it has lots of themes that have nothing to do with religion. So yeah, I hope it wouldn't put you off whether you are an atheist or a Christian or from another religion.
It didn't put me off, and I'm not a particularly religious person. So Will has said, do you have plans for something new beyond reprobation number 6?
Oh, well, there are probably a few things that might happen even before I get to reprobation 6. I've just had a historical novel published with a different publisher. It's called All the Parts of the Soul. I can show you a copy which I've got here. This is All the Parts of the Soul. And this is a historical novel set in Geneva. It's about witchcraft in the 16th century, and it's published by Quill and Crow. So that just came out 2 weeks ago. And I have also signed another book with the same publisher, Quill and Crow. It's called Buried Lightning, and it's a cosmic horror. and that's coming out next year. So I have that sort of other strand of my writing going on. I'm also thinking about a non-fiction project, but I'm still sort of formulating that in my mind. So Reprobation 5 might come before that. In terms of crime fiction, at the end of Reprobation 6, I don't know. I don't know. I'll see whether I can. I'm hoping that I'll be able to let my characters go. But maybe there'll be a spin-off. Maybe I'll write some different crime fiction. I don't know. So in terms of crime fiction, I'm not sure where I'll go after Reprobation 6, but I'll definitely go somewhere because I love crime fiction.
The book featuring witchcraft in Geneva has got like my interest. Witch fiction is really really big right now as well, isn't it? Apparently, like I've always
It
liked
is.
books with
It's
witches in, but it is like apparently the new big thing.
Yeah, and I actually wrote this book in 2019, and just after that, the sort of witch craze in fiction came out. And it's great because it's mostly female writers, and it's a very much a post-Me Too feminist perspective on witchcraft. And that, in some ways, was great for me and my publisher. In other ways, not so good because the market is, quite saturated with witches. But my book is quite different because most of the current witch fiction is writing from the perspective of women, and I chose to write from the perspective of a man, and it's quite a controversial narrative. It's getting some really good reviews, so I think people are getting it. But I did have to write like an author's note at the beginning just to warn people of the perspective. And the author and the publisher also had a big list of trigger warnings. So it's definitely not for children. This book, it tells a true story. But it's a terrible story. It is a horror story because it's true. So yeah, but it definitely forms part of the current genre of witch fiction. Yeah.
Which is generally one of my favorite genres and has been for ages. I love loads of books that involve like witches, but it's just now it's really easy to go and find books that involve them.
Yes.
Whereas before you used to have to dig around and you'd have like your favorite authors that you'd follow and hope that they'd bring out more because there wasn't much in the way of those.
Yeah,
But
there's much more, and I think it's all part of the new history, which is so much more from a sort of hidden voices perspective. I notice it when I read my daughter's history books. They have these fantastic books called Bedtime Stories for Rebel Girls and Her Story, which are stories of, well, they're not stories, it's history, but it's the stories of these women. And I did a degree in history at Oxford University, and I'd never heard of some of these women. And they're not put there as tokens. These are people who've just been written out of the traditional history. So I'm loving how history is being rewritten now to add the voices back in who had been silenced before. And I think that's coming out in fiction as well. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing so many books about witches. And also witches are cool and witches are sexy and fun. And these things really did happen. I mean, the European witch craze really happened. The Salem witch trials really happened. And these are stories that need to be told.
they really are. One of my favourite series is the Essex Witch Museum ones by Sid Moore.
Oh, I haven't read those yet.
Yeah, they're so good because she uses the real stories and sort of weaves them into fiction, if you know what I mean. But they always go back to sort of real women who were part of it, and I just really love them. Much like I really love the Reprobation series.
Thank you.
You've been asked what cosmic horror is.
Oh, so cosmic horror is it's horror that is more of a psychological / spiritual horror. It's a fear of the unknown. So if you think H.P. Lovecraft, so H.P. Lovecraft would be the sort of archetypal cosmic horror writer. So it's fear of the unknown, the idea that it's a very nihilistic sort of horror about the idea that, you know, human life is meaningless, and there are, you know, beasts in different dimensions that we don't know about. And so yeah, cosmic horror is very much synonymous with H.P. Lovecraft, and I was quite inspired by Lovecraft with this new book that I wrote, which is called Buried Lightning. And it's also, cosmic horror has modern cosmic horror has a lot of science, a lot of space. Obviously, when H.P. Lovecraft was writing, you know, science had begun, but there wasn't really any space science. But now we know so much about the universe that we can put into our horror. And I live near to CERN, the CERN Research Center in Geneva. And I think particle physics is just a gift for the cosmic horror writer. I mean, there's been far too much done with multiverses. I'm very bored of multiverses, so it's not about that. But it's a horror about particle physics. So that's what cosmic horror is, I think.
Nice. I would have said Lovecraft as an example. So
yeah.
uh,
Lovecraft is a little bit problematic, so hopefully I've sort of modernized Lovecraft and there isn't any racism in it, for example, which is one of the problems with Lovecraft. So it's a modern cosmic horror, and it also has romance. So it's a cosmic horror romance, which I think is a new genre that I invented.
I think Lovecraft just kind of like hated everybody, if you know what I mean.
yes, I think he was probably of his.
There's some horrible.
He was of his time.
He just didn't really like anyone.
Yes, he was definitely, yeah, he was a misanthrope. And he said some things that he probably couldn't even get away with in his time. He may have been cancelled. Well, if he was alive today, he would definitely be cancelled. But yeah, he's one of those authors where you have to ask yourself, can I separate the art from the artist? And he is a little bit questionable. But my favorite story by him is the Mountains of Madness. And that one, he gets away with it. But yeah, Lovecraft, cosmic horror, definitely.
I quite like The Color Out of Space.
Oh yeah,
that's a good one. But I can see how that would be a seek for you after, like, I feel there's elements of almost cosmic horror at times in
Reprobation. Yeah, definitely in Consuming Fire and Sounds. There's a little bit of cosmic horror. Consuming Fire is the second book, and yes, it brings in the possibility of a demon. Now it's up to the reader to decide whether that demon is a figment of the character's imaginations, but there is the possibility of a demon. And there is also the suggestion that hell might be in space. So there is that. And anyone who hasn't read it is probably thinking, what the hell is that? Why is that crime fiction? But it is.
Oh no,
that's really just one aspect of it.
It really works on of a crime book. I think Consuming Fire might be one of my favorites of the series.
Oh really?
Yeah,
I'm glad you say that, because a couple of people say that, but then some people didn't like Consuming Fire as much, because it does end on a bit of a cliffhanger. But that was one of my favorite ones to write. It was fun to write the voice of the demon. That's when I started experimenting a little bit with using found texts, interspersing my texts with found texts. And I did that again with Sound, the third book. And Sound is also kind of a cosmic horror because it's about psychoacoustics. When I wrote Sound, I was reading a lot about gravitational waves from the beginnings of the universe. And I love the idea that we can still, if we get big enough headphones, there's a book called Headphones Across America, actually, because they really do have a lab where they've made headphones hundreds of miles apart in America, and with them they can hear the sounds from the beginnings of the universe. So I love that idea. So yeah, Sound has a lot of psychoacoustics in it. So yeah, I guess there is a bit of a cosmic horror element to Reprobation.
There is other Sound's the one where it goes into Switzerland as well, isn't it? Briefly, sort of visit.
A little bit in sound, and especially in Consuming Fire. Consuming Fire goes into Switzerland because Darren, who is the detective, Darren Swift, he has a boyfriend who is a footballer from Switzerland. And that takes him into a Swiss village. And I live in Switzerland, and I discovered a lot living here about traditional healing. I would never have associated Switzerland with traditional healing, but Switzerland is very big on magic, and mixing magic with religion. Um, so that is woven into Consuming Fire. Yeah, definitely. Somehow it's definitely a police procedural, but it also has that in it too.
You've been asked it that, oh, this is Will. He said you haven't got a black cat with the same name as Lovecraft's.
No, no, I'm allergic to cats, so I've got a dog, and he's called Blade, but he is black though.
Blade after the vampire hunter, or just Blade? Because it is your name.
We called him Blade because three of my children were determined to call him Azog the Defiler. And I mean, I love Azog the Defiler. He's the best character in Lord of the Rings, but I was not going to be calling that name in the dog park. So we had to come up with something that I could imagine myself calling out, but also that was kind of tough sounding. So we were arguing between Rocky and Blade, and the kids voted for Blade. But it's a pretty cool name. I'm not sure if he lives up to it. He's very cute, and he is a real wuss. So I'm not sure if he lives up to Blade, but he's a great dog.
T said, do you find the research difficult surrounding witches?
Difficult, yes. Emotionally, yes, I would say. I did a lot of research for All the Parts of the Soul because it's a historical novel, and I wanted to make sure I got it right. And so I read all of the primary sources that I could get my hands on, and it's really harrowing stuff. And I guess most of us, when we think of witches, we think of fun witches and Halloween and dressing up and Disney. And so to go from that into reading these horribly misogynistic texts and reading about the trials and the executions and reading what happened, yeah, it was quite traumatic. And after I finished doing the research, I did have to sort of remind myself that there are good people in the world. Yeah, it was depressing. One of the main sources for witch hunting in the 16th century is a book called the Malleus Maleficarum, which probably lots of people have heard of, the Hammer of Witches. And this was actually the most read book after the Bible in 16th century Europe, which is shocking because of what an appalling book it is. It was basically a manual for witch hunters, telling them what to do with a woman they suspected of being a witch, and it's just absolutely vile. So yeah, doing all of that research was upsetting, and that's why the book can be quite harrowing to read, but I felt I would be doing a disservice to history if I sort of glossed over it, really. So I tried not to be gratuitous, but I really just scratched the surface of what happened, and it was very shocking. So these are stories that really needed to be told. So yeah, it was difficult, but not difficult creatively or intellectually, because I love research. I mean, I'm a historian by training, and it was so nice to go back to that. And I love researching my books in general. It's one of the coolest things about being an author, is to become a mini expert on whatever you're writing at the time. So I absolutely love research, but that was particularly harrowing research to do. I had to go into quite a dark place to do it. Yeah.
I think there's another book as well as the Malleus at the same time, or roughly around then. There were like two of them that were really common.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name. It's
I
probably on my
can't remember
shelf
the name of
somewhere.
the other one.
It will come to me. But yeah, there was another one, and they were basically like handbooks. I mean, literally, this is what you do. and what you're supposed to do is really, really horrible. I mean, the guys who wrote these books were such sickos. I mean, even by the standards of the time, it wasn't even about them believing in the devil or anything like that. It was just absolute hatred of women, basically. And I think what was particularly hard about researching witches is, I was doing this just after the Me Too movement had happened, and after a sort of backlash had begun against this new feminism, and we was already seeing this increase in violence against women, some of these freedoms being taken away in America and under populist governments and in Iran. And sometimes I'd be reading about these things that happened and wondering, how far have we actually come in terms of human morality. So that was quite depressing. I mean, you have to be careful not to be too anachronistic with these things, and I did have to remind myself that people probably really did believe in witches in the 16th century, but at the same time, a lot of this was just pure hypocrisy. I did a lot of soul searching about Calvin in particular. Calvin keeps coming up in my books. The Reprobation series is about Calvinism. All the Parts of the Soul is about Calvin himself. And I did ask myself, what did he really think? Did he really think these women were witches or not? So it's very difficult to not write a 16th century book using a 21st century mindset. But at the same time, we have to sort of have a general standard of morality that applies across the ages. So I guess that's the challenge for the historical novelist, right? So maybe witches will come into reprobation at some point too.
I'm intrigued that you're a historian by training, but you went for a sort of modern book first. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
You didn't go historical to begin with.
Yeah, it does. I've done so many different things, and I think I'm still trying to sort of find my place in the world. I mean, before I was a historian, I was a musician. And then after I did my degree, I went and I worked in a bank, and I've been a trailing spouse in many countries. And I went through that stage that lots of women go through in their sort of late 30s, where we have a sort of early midlife crisis and we try and reinvent ourselves. And I think having come through that, I firmly believe now that we end up doing what we were meant to do in the first place. Sometimes it takes us a while to get there. And I think I sort of hid from my creative side for such a long time. I think even when I did my history degree, I was sort of wanting to be an artist and a writer, but I didn't want to fully commit to that. So I did history, which is a sort of social science instead. But all of these things that you do early in your life and you sort of bury, they're all in there somewhere, and they end up coming out. I mean, I didn't read crime fiction for a long time in my 20s and 30s, but when I was a child and a teenager, I devoured it. So that's all I read. I read every Agatha Christie book, every P.D. James, every Ruth Rendell. And so that was obviously my formation in fiction. And then, I did history as a degree and a higher degree. And so research and analysis was in there somewhere. So yeah, I think these things get buried and they come out eventually. So I always tell my children, do what you're passionate about, because if you don't, you'll probably end up doing it one day anyway. So don't waste time doing something that you don't love. That's what I would say.
Good advice, especially when it comes to choosing what to study. I think because you hear so many people who go away to study a degree and then they are like, if I went back, I wouldn't do the same one.
Yeah, and I think that the world is so much more difficult for students now than it was when I was a student. It was free for a start. It was completely free, so I didn't have any debt. There were jobs at the end of it. It's much more uncertain. Even the decision to be a student at all is much more uncertain now. So I think it's really important to do what you love. And I think that in the next generation, arts and social science degrees will be important again, because so much is being done by AI now that we need creative minds and independent thinkers to sort of keep up with AI. So my eldest son is planning to do English at university, and I actually think that would be a great idea. So I'm all behind that. Yeah, I think doing what you're passionate about, whatever that is very important.
Good advice. Veering away from your writing, what have you read this year that you've really enjoyed?
Oh, I've frozen on my screen. Can you still see me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. On my screen, I'm completely frozen. What have I read this year that I have really enjoyed? Um, I Do you find that when you read on Kindle, you sort of forget what you've read? I have to write everything down because I find when it's on the Kindle, it just sort of disappears into the ether afterwards. You can definitely still hear me, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
good. It's very odd because I've completely frozen on this side. Um, I have just finished a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which is it's actually a psychology book, which I don't normally read, um, but it's about trauma and what trauma does to the body. Um, and it was amazing. And it was one of those books where I was underlining things so much that it just became pointless to underline things. So I've just read that. Um, and I've also read a wonderful book about particle physics by Benjamin Labatut called When We Cease to Understand the World, which was amazing. Very short and very inspiring. It was about Heisenberg and Einstein and their lives outside of physics. I'm just looking on my shelf to see what else I have read that I have loved recently. I've been reading a lot of Borges short stories um, because they're incredible. I don't know if you've ever read any Borges, but I'm recommending it to everyone to the point of boring everyone about Borges stories because I just think they're genius. So I'm sure that the next book I write will be influenced by Borges because I'm quite obsessed with him right now. Um, in terms of crime fiction, do you know, it's been a while, and I was just thinking this week that I need to get back into crime fiction. I go through phases where I only read crime fiction for a while. I sort of immerse myself in it, and then I take a break and I come back. And I tend to not read whole series. I tend to read um, a book here, a book there. I'll read one Dennis Lehane. I'll read one Val McDermid. So I'm jumping about with crime fiction. I think I'm about to go back into a crime fiction phase. Um, and I'm just about to embark upon the complete Sherlock Holmes with my youngest daughter. And I can't wait for that because I read it when I was her age. And we've been watching the old TV show from the 80s together, which she's loving. And I think she's just about ready to start reading with me. And that was my first crime fiction, was Sherlock Holmes. So I'm just about to start reading that again.
Cool. I've got a really good Lego particle physics book.
Oh, go on.
So it's like a brick by brick one, and you build the things. So it teaches you the particle physics by you building it in Lego.
Oh, wow. Oh, I'd love to do that. Well, you're a scientist, aren't you? So you'll probably have a much better understanding of particle physics than me. But that sounds amazing.
I'm a biologist, but yeah, I just nothing Lego themed and science was going to bypass me.
No, and you're very good at robots as well, right? You build robots with the students at
My
school.
kids are very good at building robots. I'm very not. I'm just good at facilitating them going out and like playing with them, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm still frozen here. I've got a very strange expression on my face, and it's not changed for about 5 minutes. But as long as you can see me and hear me, that's
You
okay.
are actually moving on my screen, and I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, good. It's very odd that I can't see myself, but I'm glad it's working.
But yeah, you've not frozen. You're still moving.
Okay, good.
Uh, so Yeah, I like that you've got such a wide range of reading things to kind of influence you as well.
Yeah, I read everything, and I go through phases, and it's usually related to what I'm planning to write next. This year, the sort of non-fiction project that I alluded to is something to do with walking and to do with women walking. So I've been reading many, many books about walking this year. And as you were saying with witches, there seems to be like an explosion of books about witches at the moment. There's also an explosion of books about women going for walks. So I've been reading a lot about that. And it's it's quite self-indulgent because I'm a woman who likes to go for walks. So I'm reading exactly what I like to do. So yeah, I go through phases where I'll read everything in a particular subject that I must know about. And then I move on to the next thing. Um, I've got a book here actually that I'm planning to read. I bought this in a secondhand shop a while ago. I love secondhand bookshops and finding unusual out of print things. And I'm very interested right now in the period around the turn of the 20th century, the 1900s. I'm interested in the politics and the feminism and the music and the literature. And I think that I'm going to end up writing something about that period. And this, I don't know if you can see it because I can't see myself, but this is about female spiritualists in the 1900s. This is a very odd book that I picked up in a secondhand shop. So, I'll read that, but then I'll go and read, the latest Stephen King. I'm always reading. And yeah, some of it goes into my books. Some of it gets stored in there for future books. But yeah, I don't really have a type. I shouldn't say that on the UK Crime Book Club. I should have more crime fiction to talk about. But funnily enough, I don't read that much crime fiction. Like I said, it's something that I grew up with. It's very much ingrained. And now I tend to just pick it up here and there. Oh, now I'm moving, but I'm moving 10 minutes ago. This is really odd. It's a
You are
very strange
moving.
lag.
Um, yeah, well, yeah, and you're going to get a pass for the no crime. I'm the co-founder of the group, and I'm currently reading a sci-fi book and a non-fiction about history.
Well, I think that it's totally allowed. It's totally allowed.
No crime fiction here either, which is very bad.
No, I think you're a better crime fiction reader for reading outside the genre as well. Definitely. I when I do read crime fiction, I like police procedurals that are quite technical. I find them really impressive, and I love the detail that, for example, Val McDermid goes into. I love Dennis Lehane because it's very much set in its location. The type of crime fiction I'm less into is the sort of psychological thriller written in the first person present tense. That I'm not so into. Um, it's not really my thing. So yeah, I tend to read more sort of traditional police procedurals and also occult detective fiction, because my detective is kind of an occult detective. So so yeah, but now I'm kind of in the mood for reading some crime fiction after doing this chat. So I'm going to go and have a look at what I'm going to read next.
Yeah, go have a look. My favorite crime fiction book recently was translated. It's Deceit by Unina Leos daughter. She's Icelandic.
Oh, oh wow.
And it was really good, really different. You would probably really like it. It's got like a theme that could only work if it was written in Iceland, and then a really
Okay.
different kind of crime premise. It's really unique.
Oh, I'll check that out.
Absolutely
I'll
loving
check
it.
that out.
Like a massive
Cool.
fan. I hope they translate so many more of their books because she's got loads out in Iceland. So
Okay, I'm going to look that up.
there needs to be more. Will has given us a nice quote. He says, "Whence comes it that the practice of witchcraft has so notably increased?" Heinrich Kramer.
Huh. Oh, Kramer. Was that the other? That was the other text that we were thinking of. Um, Yeah, that's a good one.
But I saw a festival recently that had a panel called Witcher. It's like a women's
Richer.
Witcher,
Oh wow.
like witch literature kind of mixed together. But it was like a women's writing festival, and they like just embraced it to the point of having like a whole panel just on the theme.
Yeah, well, it is. It's almost a genre in itself, and like you said, there are some really good books in that genre. One that I really liked, that I read while researching my last book was The Familiars, by Stacey Halls. It's up there on my shelf, Stacey Halls. It's about the Pendle witch trials. So yeah, I can totally see how there'd be a panel at a festival about that.
I know that's
Oh,
really.
he's saying that's from Malleus Maleficarum. There we go. He's quoting from the Malleus Maleficarum.
I feel like Will would definitely. He's got black cats as well, so he would definitely have the whole witch vibe going. I think
Yeah.
probably knows a lot about it. Would would enjoy some of the books about them. T asked if you had a favorite character. I'm going to guess that's a favorite character that you've created.
Favorite character I've created? Probably Miko, the guitarist, Miko Christensen. He he was really fun to write because he's really foul mouthed, and he says the most inane things, but he often tends to put the nail on the head and sort of come up with the right answers to things. He's the only character I wrote who was physically inspired by a real person. He's inspired by a real death metal guitarist who's called Alexi Laiho. So I'm not that big on physical descriptions normally, but I had a very clear image in my mind of what he looked like. So he's a lot of fun to write, because he gets quite a lot of the best lines in the sort of banter and the dialogue. He gets the witty lines. I also love Helen because she has her sort of inner monologue is quite similar to mine. We have quite a lot of things in common. Um, Darren, who is the protagonist, he's my detective. He's not always everyone's favorite character. He is kind of, I don't want to say an everyman because that would be doing him a disservice. He has a lot of very interesting backstory and he has a very interesting journey that he goes on, but he's less of a sort of larger than life character as Miko and Helen. So yeah, I would say Miko is my favorite character. But each book has its own little cast of bit parts and villains and auxiliary characters. And there is a really fun character in Lamb of God in the new book who becomes a sort of love interest for Darren. Sort of, and he's a guy who runs yeah, it's difficult to talk about him without without giving away too many spoilers, but his name is James Absalom, and he runs a gentleman's club, which is like a secret society, but he also has a YouTube channel. So Lamb of God is very much of its time. It has social media and YouTube in it. And this guy, James Absalom, he runs his own TV show on YouTube in which he's what you would call an edgelord. So he asks really controversial questions. He's a sort of anarchist version of Piers Morgan. And at the time I was writing him, I very much had Russell Brand's voice in my mind because he was a kind of Russell Brand. Now, Russell Brand has become much more controversial since I wrote the book. But he was a really fun character to write because he made these wonderfully long speeches, which are really verbose and eloquent, and I could really hear him and see him speaking. I think in general with characters, once I have a character, their voice should come to me very easily. They should sort of write themselves. And if I find that their voice is not coming and I have to think about what they're going to say and what they're going to think, then it means that the character is not really working and I need to go back to the drawing board. Because I find that once I've created my my people, they tend to sort of write the book by themselves. I know that sounds like a sort of cliched thing that authors say, but it's how it should work. If you've created your character and your situation correctly, then they just write their own conversations and they do what they're going to do, and it's almost like you're following them. So yeah, that's just a general comment on characters. I find that they tend to write themselves, especially once I've given them a name. I hate it when I have to change the name of my character because I feel like I've sort of lost them and I have to find them again. But yeah, that's would be one of the most surprising things about being an author. It's almost as if the story is out there somewhere in the universe, and you found it. You've sort of reached out and grabbed it, and now you just have to explain it. And that sounds very pretentious and cliched, but that's how it should feel when you're writing. It's like you're sort of uncovering some sort of archaeological find from the universe. Where was I going with that? Oh yes, characters. um, but the short answer is my favorite character is Miko. So there you go.
I think I'm going to be honest. I think he's probably my favorite character too.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. He's a lot of fun.
Just Miko and the whole of his band. They're all great.
Yeah, and like you were saying, they look so scary. I mean, he has a drummer called Anders who has an inverted cross tattooed on his forehead, and that is also based on a real metal musician who is in Deicide. There's a guy in Deicide who has an inverted cross on his forehead, which is such a ridiculous thing to do. And this character Anders is also enormous. He's 6'6". He's muscular. He has these tattoos, but he turns out to be super nice and also extremely useful. In a detective type of way. So yeah, that was fun to write, definitely.
Not just useful for getting things off high shelves.
That too, yeah. And carrying crates of beer. He does a lot of that.
That's I frequently lose my very tall husband for people taking him to get things off of high shelves. If you misplace him anywhere, it's probably that he's been dragged off by someone to help them. You've got a minute left. Remind everyone what they're going to go away and buy following the chat.
Oh, well, if you haven't read the Reprobation series yet, this is the first one. I recommend starting with Reprobation. If you've been working your way through, then the new one is Lamb of God. They can all be read as standalones, but I recommend. Can you see me now?
Yeah.
I still can't see myself.
No, I can see you.
Okay, good. Yeah, follow along with the characters from the beginning. And I think Lamb of God is my most enjoyable one to write. I don't know if you have a favorite, Caroline, but yeah, I recommend starting at the beginning. But this is the new one, Lamb of God. And I just, before we get cut off, I just want to say a big thank you to UK Crime Book Club, because you have supported me from the very beginning, since I was a debut author, with a very small publisher, many people not taking me seriously, not wanting to read me. And UK Crime Book Club has just been my biggest supporter from the beginning. So thank you so much.
You're very
I really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thanks for bringing us such pleasure with your books.
Well, thank you. I'm glad if you enjoy them.